Deepa had always thought of herself as a rational person, someone who didn't fall prey to the fear-mongering tactics of the media. But as she stood on the balcony of a beautiful Mumbai home facing the Arabian Sea, she couldn't deny the cold knot forming in her stomach. The coastline had receded miles into the ocean, leaving behind a desolate wasteland of sand and dead fish. As she made her way down to the beach, Deepa couldn't shake off the eerie feeling that had settled over her. The air was still, the sky devoid of any birds. She opened her binoculars and looked out at sea, but her heart sank as she saw nothing but empty horizon stretching out as far as the eye could see. Soon after what felt like a couple of hours, she noticed waves coming in from a few miles into the ocean through the lens of her binoculars. As the waves grew closer, Deepa's heart raced with fear. These were no ordinary waves. They were towering, monstrous, and at least 50 feet tall, towering higher than even the tallest building in Mumbai. The other residents around her had noticed the same thing, and they all started running back towards the land away from the beach. And then the waves hit. A deafening roar that swallowed up everything in its path. Deepa felt herself being tossed around like a rag doll, her body battered and bruised. She closed her eyes and waited for it to be over, for the darkness to claim her. Deepa was engulfed in the massive tsunami, hurtling towards the city like an unstoppable force of nature. As the waves crashed into the high-rise buildings, levels up to the sixth floor of the Mumbai coastline houses were immediately flooded. Hours of struggle later, Deepa found herself floating in the middle of the city, surrounded by water that was so deep it almost reached the sixth floor of the surrounding buildings. Survivors were looking around in shock and disbelief, realizing that only floors 7 and above were still above water. But even those skyscrapers were starting to crack at their foundations, as if the very earth was trying to swallow them whole. Deepa's thoughts raced as she tried to come up with a plan to escape the tsunami. If she could swim towards the mainland, maybe she could survive this epic catastrophe. But just as she gathered the strength to try, she looked out to the west and witnessed a scene of unimaginable terror. Waves, gigantic waves, were approaching them, towering at least a mile high. The tallest Mumbai building looked like a miniature doll in comparison. Deepa knew there was no escaping this tide, and as she thought of her parents and prayed to her God, she braced herself for the end. The waves crashed into the buildings, smashing them open like a house of cards. And before she could think, Deepa was completely engulfed in water. In just a few short hours, the city of Mumbai was no more. The whole coastline and all its history were destroyed in a matter of minutes under the weight of a tsunami of biblical proportions. And Deepa, along with countless others, had been swept away, consumed by the unrelenting power of the sea. The sea was calm when the fisherman set out for his weekly fishing trip. But as the day wore on, the sky grew dark and the waves began to rise. Soon, a thunderstorm raged overhead, and the fisherman's boat was tossed and turned like a toy in a child's hand. The fisherman clung to the steering wheel, trying to keep his vessel from capsizing. But the storm was too fierce. With a deafening crack, a bolt of lightning struck the boat, sending the fisherman tumbling into the churning sea. As he fought for his life in the water, the fisherman realized that he was bleeding from the crash, and the scent of his blood was attracting unwanted attention. He looked around and saw the fins of several sharks cutting through the water towards him. Desperately, the fisherman grabbed hold of a piece of driftwood from his broken boat and pulled himself up onto it, hoping to stay above water and out of the shark's reach. But the predators circled him relentlessly, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. They swarmed around the makeshift raft, their jaws snapping dangerously close to the fisherman's feet. He could feel their eyes on him, their predatory instincts kicking in. For hours, the fisherman battled against the sharks, using the makeshift raft to keep himself alive. But as the sun set and the darkness descended, he knew that his chances were slim. With his strength failing, he succumbed to the exhaustion and slipped into unconsciousness. When he awoke, he was no longer on the raft, but surrounded by the sharks. In a frenzy, they tore into him, ripping him limb to limb with their razor-sharp teeth. Days later, a family vacationing on a nearby island stumbled upon the gruesome remnants of the fisherman's body washed up on the shore. The sight was a haunting reminder of the power of nature and the cruel fate that can befall even the most skilled and experienced among us. Sam's day unfolded flawlessly. He arrived at the office, unbothered by the annoyances that typically plagued him. His boss showered him with genuine appreciation, and the girl he had longed for finally cast her gaze upon him. Daniel's sudden interest bewildered Sam. He couldn't fathom why she had bestowed such attention upon him. In his vulnerability, he shared the tale of his family's absence, his life as an orphan, navigating countless orphanages. Eventually, he discovered stability as a delivery partner for one of the world's largest online retailers. She had recently joined the same retailer, leagues above him in every way. After 10 days of neglect, when she finally began conversing, Sam's disbelief mingled with sheer luck. No way, he thought. 4 intense days of connection followed, hinting at a deeper bond. Little did he know of the horrors that lurked ahead. Around 9, Daniel arrived at his doorstep. They conversed and indulged in a few drinks. By 11, Sam's senses drowned in intoxication. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, and before Sam could react, Daniel welcomed four sinister figures inside. "Tie him up, boys," she commanded. Swiftly, Sam found himself bound, gagged, and suspended from the ceiling, an embodiment of terror. Though intoxicated, his fear remained palpable. He sensed impending doom, a foreboding that pierced his consciousness. Another chime echoed, and one of the men opened the door. Through the corner of his eye, Sam glimpsed an elderly man, around 90 years old, wheeled into the room, accompanied by two attendants and what appeared to be two doctors. Instantly, recognition seized him. The old man was one of the nation's wealthiest and most powerful. The doctors arranged medical kits and connected intravenous tubes to the old man's frail arms. The tubes in turn linked to Sam, initiating a twisted ritual of blood transfusion. Against his will, Sam's life force drained over the course of 2 hours, pouring into the ailing titan. Weakened by the blood loss, Sam succumbed to unconsciousness. Under the watchful gaze of the doctors, Sam was cloaked in general anesthesia, surrendering to the realm of nightmares. Relocated to a portable hospital bed, his body became an operating theater. Methodically, his organs were extracted and placed within a cryogenic refrigeration unit, preserving his vital parts for future use. As the billionaire was wheeled away, Daniel and her bodyguards commenced the disposal of Sam's lifeless form. The billionaire's car whisked him through a clandestine route to his estate. The doctors had purchased him a few more years of existence. A list of expendables, those who would go unnoticed, was compiled. Future targets were identified, their organs ripe for harvest. A gruesome endeavor to extend the lives of the world's wealthiest. Dylan, a singer-songwriter, had always been an outsider in the music industry, struggling to make ends meet. So when he was booked for a private yacht gig in the middle of the ocean with some of the richest and the most powerful people on the planet, he couldn't believe his luck. Dylan had never felt more alive than when he stepped onto the yacht. The sea air whipped his hair into a frenzy, and he could feel the salt coating his skin. He relished the feeling of being among the elites, the cream of the crop. As he stepped on board the yacht, Dylan was greeted with lavish hospitality, the likes of which he had never experienced before. He was treated like a king, and the hosts, some of the most prominent billionaires and industry moguls, seemed to value his presence on the boat. The first day passed by smoothly, with Dylan hanging around the esteemed guests, savoring the experience. The guests were cordial enough at first, each trying to outdo the other with their stories of success and riches. But as the night wore on, the air grew thicker and the atmosphere became oppressive. It was as if they were all waiting for something to happen. And then it did. As the second day arrived, everything changed. As he started his pre-dinner performance, he noticed that all the guests had changed into black robes and were wearing strange religious symbols. Suddenly, the guests began to sit in a circle, chanting words in a foreign language, while Dylan tried to ignore their bizarre behavior and continue with his performance. But when a pair of hands grabbed him and threw him into the center of the circle, He knew something was seriously wrong. Dylan tried to break free, but he was bound and tied by some of the members and left helpless in the middle of the circle. As the chanting grew louder, Dylan noticed the waves of the sea becoming more and more violent as if responding to the dark ritual. And then, in the distance, a massive creature began to emerge from the sea, its shape indistinct and horrifying. The members of the circle around him started bowing, as if in a sort of prayer. In a fleeting moment of clarity, Dylan realized that this massive unearthly creature was a god. The god responsible for their unimaginable success and fame, and he was the sacrifice. The creature's massive hand swept down, and before he knew it, Dylan was lifted up into the air, floating above the ocean. The creature was going to eat him alive, and Dylan could do nothing to stop it. The last thing he saw were the glistening teeth of the godlike sea monster before it swallowed him whole, leaving nothing behind but a haunting memory of his final moments on the yacht. Thomas had always been a man of ambition. He had dreams of making a difference in the world, of leaving a legacy that would be remembered for centuries to come. So when the opportunity presented itself for him to join the political arena, he jumped at the chance. At first, everything was going as planned. Thomas was making a name for himself, gaining popularity with the people. But then he started receiving strange invitations. Invitations to secret meetings, to events that were held in secluded locations, far from prying eyes. At first, Thomas was hesitant. He didn't know what these people wanted from him. But his curiosity got the better of him, and he decided to attend one of these meetings. What he found was a secret society, one that had been operating in the shadows for centuries. They called themselves the Order of the Black Sun, and they had one goal: to rule the world. They promised Thomas power beyond his wildest dreams, but only if he joined them and swore allegiance to their cause. Thomas was torn. On one hand, he wanted to make a difference in the world, to have the power to effect change. But on the other hand, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was not quite right about this group. As the days went on, Thomas became more and more indoctrinated into the Order's way of thinking. He was given secret knowledge, taught ancient rituals, and was even initiated into the inner circle. But then, one night, Thomas discovered the true nature of the Order's power. He found himself in a room filled with people, all wearing black robes and chanting in unison. In the center of the room was a young woman, bound and gagged, struggling against her bonds. Thomas was horrified. He had been lied to, used as a pawn, and in the Order's twisted game. He tried to run, but it was too late. The Order had their hooks in him, and there was no escaping their grasp. As the ritual reached its climax, Thomas realized the true price of power. The young woman was sacrificed, her blood spilled to fuel the Order's magic. Thomas was left with a choice: stay with the Order and become a monster, or run and risk becoming the next sacrifice. In the end, Thomas chose to run. He spent the rest of his life haunted by the memories of that night, knowing that he had been complicit in a heinous act. But he also knew that he had escaped, and that was enough to keep him going. Little did he know, however, that the Order had eyes and ears everywhere. They were always watching, always waiting for their next victim. And when Thomas least expected it, they came for him. He was never seen again, his fate unknown to all but the Order.